They found another body yesterday. Same signature, same impossible circumstances. My name is Marcus Chen, and until 3 months ago, I was the FBI's leading behavioral analyst for serial cases, until I made one mistake that cost everything, until Detroit became my exile. The locals here whisper about the Motor City Phantom, a figure that's been taking people for decades. Always the same pattern, always the same result. Bodies found in places they couldn't possibly reach. But here's what the whispers don't tell you. The Phantom doesn't just take bodies. It takes pieces of your sanity with every case file you open, every crime scene you visit, every witness you interview. I came to Detroit to disappear, to escape the memories of my last case gone wrong. But the city had other plans. 3 bodies in 2 weeks, all bearing the mark I'd seen before, all connected to something the Bureau never wanted me to find. This isn't just another serial case. This is the story of how Detroit's most persistent legend became my most terrifying reality, how the line between folklore and fact disappeared entirely, how I learned that some monsters are real, and they've been waiting in the shadows much longer than anyone imagined. The truth about the Motor City Phantom will make you question everything you think you know about the impossible, about the supernatural, about the thin veil between our world and something much darker. Subscribe and hit the bell notification. Tell me what time you're watching and from which city, because after tonight, you might want to check your locks twice. Let me tell you about the nightmare that Detroit became. The rain hammered Detroit for 3 straight days when I discovered the first file. I'd rented a basement apartment in Corktown, one of Detroit's few neighborhoods still fighting for survival. The landlord, Mrs. Patterson, was desperate enough to rent to someone with my tarnished reputation. No background checks, cash transactions only, perfect for someone trying to vanish completely. The apartment came furnished with decades-old furniture and a filing cabinet the previous tenant abandoned. I'd been using it to store my coffee when I noticed something strange. The bottom drawer wouldn't slide open completely. Something was wedged behind it, blocking the mechanism. That something was a manila folder marked MC 1987 in faded blue ink. Inside were photocopied police reports, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all documenting the disappearance of Sarah Holbrook, age 24, last seen leaving her job at Ford's River Rouge plant on October 15, 1987. The crime scene photos showed her abandoned car on Michigan Avenue, doors unlocked, purse still inside, no signs of struggle. But what made my blood run cold was the witness statement from security guard Tommy Reeves. Saw her walking toward the old Packard plant around midnight. He'd written in shaky handwriting, "But that's impossible. Plant's been sealed since 1958. No way in or out." 3 days later, they found Sarah's body inside the Packard plant, 3rd floor, in a room that had been welted shut for 30 years. The coroner's report sent chills down my spine. No signs of trauma, no evidence of how she'd entered the building. She'd simply materialized there, as if she'd walked through solid steel. At the bottom of the file was a handwritten note that made my hands shake. Pattern continues, same as 1962, 1974, 1981. Phantom strikes every 6 to 7 years. Police refuse to connect cases. Miss Detective R. Sullivan, retired. My pulse quickened as I closed the file. This was exactly the type of case the Bureau had forbidden me from pursuing, the type that had destroyed my career and sent me into exile. But Detroit's cold October wind rattled my windows like skeletal fingers, and I couldn't escape the feeling that someone had deliberately left this file for me to find, that after 3 months of hiding, the darkness had finally tracked me down. I grabbed my laptop and started researching. If Detective Sullivan was still alive, I needed to find him immediately, because if the pattern held true, The Motor City Phantom was due to strike again, and every instinct I'd developed over 15 years with the Bureau screamed that it wouldn't wait much longer. The hunt was about to begin. Detective Robert Sullivan lived in a retirement home on the city's east side, in one of the few buildings that hadn't succumbed to abandonment or demolition. The orderly who escorted me to his room warned me that Sullivan's memory fluctuated unpredictably, but his eyes blazed with sharp intelligence when he looked up from his wheelchair. "You're the FBI man," he said before I could speak, "the one they discarded for chasing ghosts. How did you?" Word travels like wildfire in our small community, especially when someone starts asking about the Phantom. He gestured urgently to the chair beside his bed. "Sit quickly. We don't have much time before they realize you're here." Sullivan's room was sparse, except for one wall completely covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and handmade charts connected by red string. 40 years of meticulous documentation, 40 years of a pattern the official police reports had systematically ignored. "Started in 1943, Sullivan said, his weathered finger tracing a timeline on the wall. Young woman named Rebecca Mills. Found her inside the old Michigan Central Station, in the waiting room that had been sealed for renovation work. No way in, no possible method for her to reach that location." The photographs revealed the same impossible circumstances, repeated across decades, like a broken record. Bodies discovered in sealed buildings, locked rooms with no keys, places that had been completely inaccessible for years. Every 6 to 7 years, without fail, Sullivan continued, his voice gaining intensity. Always a young adult, between 20 and 30. Always found somewhere they absolutely couldn't be. Coroner always ruled it natural causes, even when logic screamed otherwise. What about witnesses? Someone must have seen something. Sullivan's eyes lit up as he pointed to a section marked sightings. Dozens of reports from security guards, homeless individuals, late-night workers, all describing the identical figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing what appeared to be a coat from decades past. Always spotted near the location where the next body would eventually appear. Police stopped taking the reports seriously after the first few years, Sullivan said bitterly. Much easier to dismiss it as urban legend than admit they couldn't explain the impossible. I studied the timeline carefully. The last confirmed case was Sarah Holbrook in 1987. 36 years of silence. Why did it stop? What changed? Sullivan's expression transformed, becoming darker and more frightened. Who says it stopped? He wheeled himself rapidly to a desk and pulled out a folder marked Unofficial 2023. Inside were printouts from social media posts, missing person flyers, and coroner reports he'd somehow obtained through unofficial channels. 3 bodies in the past 2 weeks, all discovered in impossible locations. All ruled natural causes, despite circumstances that defied every law of physics. "The pattern's accelerating dangerously," Sullivan whispered. "Something fundamental has changed. The Phantom isn't waiting 6 years anymore. It's hunting more frequently." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Room 237, Packard Plant. Come alone tonight. You'll understand everything." Sullivan saw my face go pale. "You received one, didn't you? A direct message?"
"How did you?"
"Because I got the identical message yesterday." He showed me his phone with trembling hands. Same text, same impossible invitation to a sealed building. "Don't go." Sullivan grabbed my arm desperately. "I've been tracking this entity for 40 years, and I've never been contacted directly. Something's fundamentally different this time. Something terrifying is happening." But as I stared at the wall of evidence, at the decades of cover-ups and official denial, I realized I had no choice. The Bureau had trained me to recognize that patterns don't change without catastrophic reason. If the Phantom was altering its behavior after decades of consistency, There was something specific it wanted, and somehow, impossibly, it wanted something from me. But the pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. The Packard automotive plant had once been Detroit's industrial crown jewel, 3.5 million square feet of American manufacturing supremacy. Now it loomed as a colossal monument to decay, its shattered windows like dead eyes surveying the city's corpse. I arrived at the stroke of midnight, as the cryptic message had demanded. October's bitter wind carried the metallic scent of rust and the ghost of abandoned dreams through the skeletal remains of the massive structure. Chain-link fencing surrounded the complex, but decades of urban explorers and metal scrappers had carved more holes than barriers. Room 237 waited on the second floor of the main administration building. I climbed through treacherous debris and past graffiti that seemed to shift and writhe in my flashlight's beam. The building groaned around me like a dying giant, settling deeper into the earth with each passing year. The door to room 237 stood wide open, invitation and trap combined. Inside, the room defied every law of physics and logic, completely clean. No debris whatsoever, no graffiti, no trace of the decay that consumed every other inch of the building. In the center sat a single wooden desk with a manila folder and an ancient tape recorder. My flashlight flickered ominously as I approached the desk. The folder was labeled Agent Marcus Chen, Personal Classification. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, FBI files from my final case, the one that had ended my career in disgrace. But these versions contained details that had been completely redacted from my copies. Details about other agents who had investigated similar supernatural cases. Details about what had happened to every single one of them. Agent Patricia Williams vanished while investigating ritualistic murders in Salem, Oregon. Last seen entering a building that had been demolished 3 years before her disappearance. Agent David Park, discovered in his locked office after investigating a series of impossible disappearances in rural Montana. Apparent heart attack. No signs of struggle. Security footage showed absolutely no one entering or leaving his office for 12 hours. The pattern crystallized with horrifying clarity. Agents who investigated supernatural cases too deeply didn't just lose their careers. They lost their lives, their identities, their very existence. At the bottom of the file was a note in handwriting I didn't recognize. The Bureau knows about us, about what we investigate, about what investigates us in return. Some cases are closed, not because they're solved, but because they solve the investigators permanently. I pressed play on the tape recorder with trembling fingers. The voice that emerged was unmistakably mine, but I had absolutely no memory of making this recording. If you're listening to this recording, then you've already gone too far to turn back safely. The Phantom isn't just a serial killer or supernatural entity. It's something far older and more dangerous, something that feeds on investigation itself. Every case file you open, every witness you interview, every piece of evidence you examine, it all brings you inexorably closer to becoming part of the pattern yourself. My recorded voice continued with chilling certainty. The Bureau doesn't hunt monsters, Marcus. It protects them by keeping agents like us busy, with cases we can never truly solve, by making absolutely certain we disappear before we can reveal the truth to the world. The tape stopped abruptly. In the suffocating silence that followed, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, slow, deliberate, purposeful, getting steadily closer. I grabbed the folder and lunged toward the door, but it slammed shut with supernatural force before I could reach it. The handle refused to turn, no matter how hard I twisted. The room had become a sealed tomb, exactly like all the others in the Phantom's decades-long pattern. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. A voice spoke from the other side. My voice, but aged by decades of impossible burden. "Hello, Marcus. It's time we finally talked face to face." The door swung open silently, and I found myself staring at my own reflection, Same face, down to every detail. Same build and posture. Same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood bicycle accident. But the eyes were completely different. Ancient, weary, in a way that spoke of decades rather than years, carrying knowledge that had cost more than anyone should ever pay. "You're handling this revelation better than most," the other Marcus said, stepping into the impossible room, though I suppose that makes perfect sense. We always were exceptional at adapting to situations that shouldn't exist. "What are you exactly?" "I'm you, 20 years from now, maybe 30 or 40. Time moves differently when you become part of the pattern." He gestured to the pristine room around us. "This is how it always starts, with questions that can't be answered through conventional investigation methods." The other Marcus sat on the edge of the desk with casual familiarity, exactly as I would have. "The Bureau recruits people like us because we excel at finding patterns in chaos, but some patterns were never meant to be discovered. Some investigations transform the investigator far more than they reveal any truth. The Phantom isn't what you think it is. It's not a serial killer or supernatural entity. It's a process, a systematic method of managing people who get dangerously close to certain truths. The supernatural cases the Bureau pretends don't exist, they're absolutely real, and they're carefully protected." My phone buzzed urgently. Text from Sullivan. "Building completely surrounded by federal agents. Full tactical response team. They're coming for you right now." The other Marcus smiled with profound sadness. "Right on schedule as always. They'll offer you a standard deal. Return to the Bureau. Stop investigating supernatural cases permanently. Forget everything you've learned. Most agents accept immediately. And if I refuse, then you become part of the pattern. Another impossible disappearance. Another urban legend for the next investigator to chase obsessively." Through the grimy window, I could see black SUVs surrounding the entire building, flashlights and tactical gear everywhere. A full Bureau response team for one supposedly disgraced agent. "There's a third option," the other Marcus said quietly. "You can choose to become the Phantom, take my place in this impossible role, manage the cases that can't be solved through normal means, keep the supernatural world completely separate from the mundane one, by manipulating investigators, by making innocent people disappear, by protecting them from truths they absolutely cannot handle, by keeping the world from learning about things that would destroy civilization itself." His expression hardened with terrible certainty. "Do you know what happens when ordinary people learn about genuine supernatural threats? Salem witch trials, mass hysteria, genocide disguised as protection." Heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell below. The Bureau team was moving with military precision. "Choose quickly, Marcus. Door number 1. Return to the Bureau and spend the rest of your career investigating mundane crimes while real monsters stay safely hidden. Door number 2. Refuse and become another unsolved mystery that haunts future investigators. Door number 3. Take my place and become the guardian between worlds." "What happens to you if I choose the third option?" The other Marcus smiled for the first time, and relief flooded his ancient features. "I finally get to rest. 20 years of managing impossible cases, of making supernatural things possible, of protecting a world that doesn't know it desperately needs protection. I'm tired, Marcus, so incredibly tired." The footsteps reached our floor, multiple agents moving with tactical coordination. I looked at my older self, at the crushing weight of decades in his eyes, at the folder full of cases that defied every natural law, at the choice between 3 different kinds of damnation. "If I become the Phantom," I said, "do I get to save people, or just manage their disappearances?" "Both. Neither. You get to decide which truths are worth revealing, and which are worth hiding forever, which investigators are ready for reality, and which need to be protected from it at any cost." The door exploded inward with tremendous force, Bureau agents in full tactical gear flooded the room, weapons drawn and ready. But they saw only me, standing alone in an empty room filled with nothing but dust, debris, and the lingering scent of decay. The other Marcus had vanished completely. The folder had disappeared. The tape recorder had never existed. Agent Chen, the team leader said, lowering his weapon with visible confusion, "You need to come with us immediately." They transported me to a safe house in Grosse Pointe, one of Detroit's few remaining wealthy enclaves. The interrogation room was surprisingly comfortable. Fresh coffee, sandwiches, no handcuffs or restraints. Professional courtesy for a former colleague, even a disgraced one. Assistant Director Sarah Kim entered with the confident stride that marked bureau leadership. I'd worked closely with her before my spectacular downfall. She'd been sympathetic then, offering support and understanding. Now her expression was purely business. "Marcus," she said, settling into the chair across from me, "you've been remarkably busy lately." "Depends entirely on your definition of busy." She opened a tablet and showed me crystal clear surveillance footage from the Packard plant. Me entering the building alone. Me standing in room 237, apparently having an intense conversation with myself. Me being discovered by the tactical team, looking completely bewildered. "Fascinating conversation you were having," Kim said with professional interest. "With whom exactly? Would you believe me if I told you the truth? Try me. I might surprise you." I studied her face carefully, searching for signs of deception or hidden knowledge, looking for hints that she understood more than she was revealing. The Bureau had trained me extensively to read people, but Kim had always been frustratingly unreadable. I was talking to myself, literally, an older version of me, who claims to be something called the Phantom. He offered me a position managing supernatural cases that the Bureau pretends don't exist. Kim's expression remained completely neutral. "And what did you tell him?" I didn't get the chance to answer before your team dramatically arrived. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with new intensity. "The Bureau has a significant problem, Marcus. Agents who investigate certain types of cases have a documented tendency to develop severe psychological issues, paranoid delusions, unshakable belief in supernatural explanations for perfectly normal phenomena. It's a recognized occupational hazard. Like Agent Williams, Agent Park, all the others who got too close." Kim's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "How do you know those specific names?" "The same way I know about the real reason I was dismissed from the Bureau. It wasn't because I made a mistake on the Johnson case. It was because I got dangerously close to discovering something you desperately didn't want discovered." She remained silent for a long, tense moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different, tired, like someone carrying an unbearable burden she couldn't share with anyone. "There are things in this world that most people absolutely cannot handle knowing," she said quietly. "Things that would cause mass panic, complete social collapse, the end of rational civilization as we know it. So you systematically cover them up. We manage them carefully. We investigate just enough to contain immediate threats, then we classify the files and move on to safer cases. We recruit agents who excel at pattern recognition, then we make absolutely certain they don't recognize the patterns we need them to avoid. And when agents get too close to the truth, we offer them two standard choices: return to normal casework and forget everything they've learned, or pursue their investigations and discover that some questions are infinitely better left unanswered." My phone buzzed with another message. "Unknown number. The offer still stands. Choose quickly before the window closes." Kim saw the message and raised an eyebrow. Third option just presented itself. I looked at her with growing understanding. "How long have you known about the Phantom?" "Since my second year with the Bureau. I was investigating a series of impossible disappearances in Chicago. got dangerously close to the truth, had a conversation remarkably similar to the one you're having right now, and you chose what exactly? I chose to become part of the system instead of fighting it futilely, to help manage the boundary between what people can know and what they absolutely need to be protected from knowing. She leaned forward with sudden intensity. The Phantom isn't a monster, Marcus. It's a necessity. Someone has to stand between the supernatural world and the mundane one. Someone has to make the impossible choices about which truths can be revealed and which would destroy everything. So you knew I'd end up here eventually. You deliberately arranged for me to find that first file. I arranged for you to have a choice. The same choice every agent like us eventually faces. Join the system, fight the system, and inevitably lose, or become the system itself. The lights flickered ominously. Outside, Detroit's eternal wind carried whispers of abandoned dreams and forgotten nightmares through the darkness. What happens if I refuse all three options? Kim smiled with profound sadness. Then you become just another urban legend, another story about an FBI agent who disappeared while investigating something he shouldn't have. Another file in a folder marked Cases That Solve Themselves. My phone buzzed again. Sullivan, federal agents removed me from the retirement home. They're offering me a deal. Forget everything I've learned. Keep quiet about the pattern forever. Live out my remaining years in comfortable ignorance. I'm 93 years old, Marcus. I'm taking their deal. I looked directly at Kim. How many others know the complete truth? Enough to keep the system functioning smoothly, not enough to threaten its security. We're not the villains in this story, Marcus. We're the people standing between humanity and truths that would completely shatter their reality. And the bodies, the people who die in impossible circumstances, are volunteers, people who've learned too much and consciously choose to become part of the pattern rather than live with knowledge they can't share with anyone. It's not murder, Marcus. It's transformation. The room fell into oppressive silence, except for the distant sound of Detroit settling into its eternal decay. I thought about Sullivan, 93 years old, and ready to accept comfortable ignorance rather than face impossible truth, about the other agents who had faced this exact choice before me, about the crushing weight of protecting a world that didn't know it, desperately needed protection. If I become the Phantom, I said slowly, do I get to choose who lives and who becomes part of the pattern? You get to choose which truths are revealed and which remain hidden forever, which investigators are ready for reality and which need to be protected from it at any cost. It's not about life and death, Marcus. It's about sanity and madness, knowledge and ignorance, order and complete chaos. My phone displayed a final message. Time's up. Choose now or lose the opportunity forever. I looked at Kim, at the woman who had faced this same impossible choice years ago, and decided to become part of the machine rather than fight it uselessly, at the system that protected humanity by systematically lying to it, at the choice between three different kinds of prison. The weight of destiny settled on my shoulders like a physical burden. I accept, I said. Reality shifted the instant those words left my lips. Kim smiled, but her smile belonged to someone completely different now. Someone older, infinitely more tired, like she'd been carrying an impossible burden for decades and could finally set it down. Thank you, she said, and her voice carried decades of gratitude. I've been waiting so desperately long for someone qualified to take this responsibility. The room around us dissolved like morning mist. The safe house walls vanished, revealing the same impossibly clean space from the Packard plant. The desk, the chair, the supernatural cleanliness in the heart of absolute decay. This is the real office, Kim explained. The place between places where the Phantom operates, where decisions are made about which truths can be revealed and which must remain hidden forever. She handed me an ornate file cabinet key that felt warm to the touch. Everything you need to know is preserved in there. Case files dating back to 1943, patterns within patterns, the real structure of how the supernatural world intersects with the mundane one. I opened the first drawer with trembling hands. Inside were hundreds of files, each documenting a case where reality had bent beyond normal understanding. But these weren't just crime reports. They were management decisions, choices about which witnesses needed to forget what they'd seen, which investigators were ready for larger truths, which cases could be solved and which needed to remain eternal mysteries. The Bureau doesn't hunt monsters, Kim continued with absolute certainty. It protects them by ensuring they remain in the realm of legend rather than documented fact, by making certain that people who encounter genuine supernatural phenomena either join our system or become part of the mythology. And the bodies, the people found in impossible places, are messages, reminders to investigators that some patterns shouldn't be followed too closely. Most agents receive the hint and step back to safer cases. The ones who don't, she gestured to the endless files, become part of the pattern themselves. I opened a file marked Chen, Marcus Recruitment Profile. Inside was my entire career history, laid out like a roadmap. Every case I'd worked, every time I'd gotten close to something genuinely supernatural, every decision that had led inexorably to this moment. You've been watching me for years, guiding my entire career. We've been carefully guiding you for years toward cases that would teach you to recognize the impossible, away from truths you weren't ready to handle, toward this precise moment when you'd be prepared to take full responsibility for managing the boundary between worlds. The other Marcus materialized beside the desk like a fading photograph. The older version of myself looked genuinely relieved for the first time, peaceful in a way I'd never been in my entire life. The transition is remarkably simple, he said with visible relief. You become me, I become memory. The pattern continues with you as its guardian. What happens to my life, my identity, everything I was? Marcus Chen, the disgraced FBI agent, died in the Packard plant tonight, Kim said matter-of-factly. Apparent heart attack while exploring abandoned buildings. Another tragic casualty of Detroit's urban decay. But the phantom lives on, protecting humanity from truths it cannot handle. She handed me a new phone that felt strangely familiar. Your first case is already waiting. A young journalist in Portland investigating disappearances near the Columbia River. She's getting dangerously close to something real, something incredibly dangerous that could expose everything. You need to decide whether she's ready for the truth or needs to be protected from it. I stared at the phone, at the choice between revelation and protection, between truth and ignorance, between helping someone discover reality or helping them avoid it completely. And if I decide she's not ready for the truth, then she becomes part of the pattern. Another impossible disappearance, another urban legend for the next investigator to chase obsessively. The weight of the decision settled on my shoulders like a physical burden made of lead. The responsibility for managing the boundary between the known and unknown, between safety and truth, between protection and revelation. How do I know I'm making the right choice? Kim smiled with infinite sadness. You don't. That's exactly what makes it a burden rather than a power. You live with the consequences of every single decision, every truth revealed too early, every person protected from knowledge they might have been able to handle. The other Marcus faded like morning mist, his expression peaceful for the first time since I'd encountered him, released from decades of impossible decisions and crushing responsibility. I was alone with Kim in the space between spaces, holding the phone that would connect me to my first case as the Phantom. One final question, I said. Was any of this real, or am I having a complete psychotic break in a Detroit basement? Kim laughed with genuine amusement. Does it matter anymore? Either way, you're the Phantom now. Either way, you're responsible for protecting people from truths they can't handle. Either way, the pattern continues with you as its guardian. I looked at the phone, at the case waiting for my decision, at the choice between helping someone discover reality or protecting them from it. And I made my first decision as the guardian between worlds. The screen lit up with a single word: Portland. 6 months later, Detective Sullivan found me. He discovered me in the clean room that had become my permanent office, the impossible space that existed in the heart of Detroit's decay. He looked older but more peaceful, like someone who had finally accepted the weight of truth after a lifetime of questions. "I couldn't take their deal," he said, settling carefully into the chair across from my desk. 93 years old, and I still couldn't accept comfortable lies over difficult truth. "So you came to find the Phantom." "I came to find you specifically, to understand what you've become and what that means for all of us." I showed him the files that had consumed my existence, cases from across the country where I'd made life-altering decisions about truth and ignorance, investigators who had been guided away from dangerous knowledge, others who had been allowed to discover realities that changed them forever. "Do you regret it?" Sullivan asked quietly, becoming something that isn't quite human anymore. I considered the question carefully, weighing the crushing responsibility against the knowledge that I was protecting innocent people from truths that would destroy them. "I regret that it's necessary," I said finally, "but not that I chose to do it." Sullivan nodded with understanding. "I have one final case for you. A young FBI agent named Patricia Williams. She's investigating ritualistic disappearances in Salem, Oregon, getting dangerously close to something that should remain hidden." I smiled knowingly. Agent Williams disappeared 3 years ago, became part of the pattern according to official records. Did she, or did she become something else entirely? He handed me a thick file with trembling hands. Inside were recent reports from Salem, witnesses describing a figure in federal clothing who appeared at crime scenes, guided investigations away from dangerous truths, protected local authorities from knowledge they couldn't handle safely. Another phantom, another guardian between worlds. "The pattern is much bigger than we originally thought," Sullivan said with growing excitement. "It's not just one person making impossible decisions. It's an entire network, a hidden system of protectors who chose to become something other than human in order to keep humanity safe from itself." I opened the file, studying evidence of others like me, scattered across the country, people who had faced the same choice and made the same decision, who had accepted the burden of managing truth in a world that couldn't handle it. How many others are there exactly? I don't know the precise number, but I think that's your next major case to investigate, to find the other phantoms, to understand the true scope of what we've become part of. Sullivan stood to leave, then paused at the door with sudden urgency. "One more thing. The journalist in Portland, the one you decided to protect by making her disappear from the investigation. She's not gone. She's in a place like this one, learning to make the same impossible choices you make. You're saying I recruited her into the system." "I'm saying the pattern recruits itself automatically. The people who get close enough to touch the supernatural world either run away in terror, go completely insane, or become part of the system that manages it." After he left, I sat alone in my impossible office, surrounded by files that documented the boundary between reality and legend, between truth and necessary lies, between protection and revelation. My phone buzzed with a new case assignment. A paranormal investigator in Chicago who was getting too close to something that absolutely shouldn't be disturbed. Another crucial decision to make about protection versus revelation. I picked up the phone and made the call, my voice changing as I spoke, becoming older, infinitely more tired, carrying the weight of decisions that protected a world from truths it couldn't bear. "Hello," I said with practiced authority. "We need to talk immediately." The pattern continues without end. The boundary holds firm, and somewhere in the space between legend and reality, the guardians maintain their eternal watch. Because some truths are too dangerous for daylight exposure, some investigations change the investigator more than they reveal the truth, and some monsters are real precisely because they choose to protect the world from things far worse than themselves. The Motor City Phantom lives on, and now you understand exactly why it has to. Subscribe and hit the bell notification if you want to hear more stories from the boundary between worlds. Tell me what time you're watching and from which city, because after tonight, you might start noticing patterns that were always there waiting to be discovered. Patterns that some people spend their lives investigating obsessively, and others spend their existence protecting you from. Sweet dreams. And remember to check your locks